A ring of carved stone stood on a hill in southeastern Turkey. Almost 12,000 years ago, long before pottery, long before cities, and long before the pyramids of Egypt. For a very long time, nobody in the modern world understood what that hill really was. It looked ordinary from a distance, just another rise in the landscape near modern Canlair, but beneath it lay one of the most disruptive archaeological discoveries ever made. A monumental Neolithic site, now known as Göbekli Tepe, dated mainly to the pre-Pottery Neolithic and famous for its massive T-shaped limestone pillars. UNESCO identifies the site as an early monumental ensemble built roughly between 9,600 and 8,200 BC, while current Turkish and German research places its broader use in the early Neolithic, beginning around 9600 BCE. Tonight, we are going to follow that story, step by step, in plain terms and in chronological order. We will look at where Göbekli Tepe stands, when it was built, who likely built it, what archaeologists actually found there, why the pillars matter, and how this place forced scholars to reconsider one of the oldest assumptions about civilization. At first came farming, then permanent settlement, then religion on a monumental scale. Göbekli Tepe did not make every older theory disappear, and experts still debate important details, but it did make one thing impossible to ignore. Hunter-gatherer communities, or communities only beginning to change their way of life, were capable of organizing labor, quarrying stone, raising monumental architecture, and creating a symbolic world far more complex than many researchers once imagined. This mattered because Göbekli Tepe is not just an old site, it is a challenge to the old timeline of how organized human society began. A few decades ago, many people outside archaeology had never heard the name at all, and even early surveys in the 1960s did not recognize the hill for what it was. Only in the 1990s did renewed investigation reveal its true antiquity and significance. Since then, Göbekli Tepe has often been introduced to the public with a dramatic label such as the world's first temple. But even that phrase needs care, because archaeologists still discuss exactly how the site functioned and whether it was solely ritual, partly residential, or something more complex. That uncertainty is part of what makes the site so important. The stones are real, the carvings are real, the chronology is real, but the full social meaning is still under investigation. How did people without metal tools, without writing, and before established urban life create a place like this on a high ridge overlooking the plain? That is the central question we will keep returning to. Before we begin, take a second to like the video, subscribe to SleepTide, and leave a guided comment below. Where are you watching from? What time is it there right now? And do you think ritual gathering came before permanent civilization? Or did civilization make places like this possible? That question sits at the center of the Göbekli Tepe debate, and by the end of this journey, you will see why it is still not a simple one. Now, with that in mind, we begin at the landscape itself. Because the first clue to understanding Göbekli Tepe is not only in the pillars, but in the hill, the region, and the world in which its builders lived long before archaeologists arrived with measuring equipment and excavation grids. The hill, now known as Göbekli Tepe, stood quietly above the Harran Plain in southeastern Anatolia, in what is today southern Turkey. The name itself means potbelly hill in Turkish, a simple description of the rounded mound that rises gently from the surrounding landscape. From the top of this hill, a person can see across wide stretches of fertile land that connect the upper valleys of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. This region is part of what scholars call the Fertile Crescent, a broad arc of territory stretching across parts of the modern Middle East, where early agriculture would later emerge. The location mattered because it placed Göbekli Tepe at the intersection of ecological zones, woodland, and river valleys where hunter-gatherer groups could move seasonally and access a wide range of plant and animal resources. Around 12,000 years ago, near the end of the last ice age, the climate in this region was beginning to stabilize after a long period of dramatic fluctuations. The Younger Dryas, a sudden return to colder and drier conditions that lasted roughly from 10,900 to 9,700 BCE, had already reshaped the lives of many human communities. Groups that had previously depended on mobile hunting and gathering had to adapt to changing rainfall patterns and shifting animal migrations. In the hills of southeastern Anatolia, people relied heavily on wild cereals such as einkorn, wheat, and barley, along with gazelle, wild cattle, boar, and other animals that moved through the plains. Archaeological evidence from nearby sites shows that communities were experimenting with new ways of organizing their lives, sometimes returning to the same seasonal camps year after year. This mattered because it created the social conditions in which larger cooperative projects could begin to appear. For most of the 20th century, archaeologists believed that monumental architecture only appeared after farming had already transformed human societies. The traditional model suggested a clear sequence. First came agriculture, then permanent villages, then increasingly complex social structures that eventually produced temples and ceremonial centers. According to that framework, large stone monuments required surplus food, stable settlements, and hierarchical organization features usually associated with later Neolithic societies. If that model were entirely correct, then a hill like Göbekli Tepe, covered with massive worked stones, should have belonged to a much later stage of human history. But when researchers eventually began to study the site more carefully, the dates did not match the expectations. The first modern survey of the hill happened in 1963 during a joint project by the University of Chicago and Istanbul University. At that time, archaeologists noticed scattered fragments of worked limestone and some large stones, partially visible at the surface. However, the survey team interpreted the site as a medieval cemetery and did not recognize the deeper layers beneath it. This mattered because, without excavation, the true scale and age of the structures remained hidden. The hill itself is not a natural formation in the usual sense. It is largely a mound created by human activity over thousands of years. Layers of construction, use, abandonment, and deliberate burial slowly built the rise that later visitors would simply see as another hill in the landscape. Everything changed in the 1990s when a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt revisited the site. Schmidt had already been working at nearby Neolithic locations and recognized something unusual in the stones visible at the surface. The shapes suggested large T-shaped pillars, a form known from earlier Neolithic contexts, but never on the scale hinted at here. In 1995, Schmidt and his team from the German Archaeological Institute began systematic excavations. Almost immediately, they uncovered the tops of enormous limestone pillars arranged in circular enclosures. These pillars were not rough stones pulled from the ground. They had been carefully shaped, smoothed, and decorated with carved reliefs of animals such as foxes, snakes, wild boars, and birds. What made this discovery so striking was the dating. Radiocarbon analysis and stratigraphic study placed the earliest layers of construction around 9600 BC, deep within the pre-Pottery Neolithic period. At that time, there is little evidence for fully developed farming villages in the region. Instead, most communities were still primarily hunter-gatherers, though some were beginning to cultivate wild plants and experiment with domestication. This mattered because it meant that the builders of Göbekli Tepe organized massive stone construction projects before agriculture had fully transformed their society. The pillars themselves could weigh up to 16 tons, and many were carved directly from limestone bedrock located nearby. Moving and erecting stones of that size required coordination, planning, and sustained collective labor. As excavation continued, the scale of the site became clearer. The visible enclosures were only part of a much larger complex buried beneath the mound. Ground-penetrating radar and other surveys suggested that dozens of circular or oval structures might still lie hidden underground. Each enclosure typically contained a ring of tall, T-shaped pillars set into stone walls, with two even larger pillars standing at the center. Archaeologists began to suspect that these central pillars represented stylized human forms, because some of them include carved arms, hands, and belts. The heads are abstract, forming the horizontal top of the T shape, while the vertical shaft suggests a torso. If this interpretation is correct, the pillars may represent powerful symbolic figures watching over the space. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, Göbekli Tepe had become one of the most important archaeological discoveries of the modern era. Yet the deeper question remained unresolved. Why would mobile or semi-mobile communities invest so much effort into building monumental stone enclosures on a hilltop? The answer could reshape how scholars understand the transition from foraging to farming. Some researchers began to propose that shared ritual activity, large gatherings for ceremonies, feasting, and symbolic expression might have helped create the social bonds needed for early agriculture to develop. In that scenario, places like Göbekli Tepe were not the result of civilization, but one of the forces that helped produce it. At this point, the story moves from discovery to construction itself. To understand Göbekli Tepe, we need to look closely at how these enormous pillars were actually made, where the stone came from, and what kind of organized effort would have been required to build the first enclosure. In the next act, we follow the builders from the limestone quarries to the rising circles of stone that would redefine the earliest chapters of human architecture. When archaeologists began studying the stone pillars of Göbekli Tepe in detail, one question immediately stood out. Where did the stone come from, and how did people move it without metal tools, wheels, or domesticated draft animals? The answer turned out to be both simple and revealing. The limestone used to build the pillars lies directly beneath and around the hill itself. In several places close to the enclosures, archaeologists identified ancient quarry areas where large blocks had been cut from the bedrock. Tool marks are still visible on the stone surfaces, showing the methods used by Neolithic workers more than 11,000 years ago. These marks indicate the use of stone tools, particularly flint and other hard materials, to chip away channels around large sections of limestone until the blocks could be separated from the surrounding rock. This mattered because the availability of high-quality limestone close to the construction area made large-scale building possible in a society that otherwise lacked advanced technology. The bedrock at Göbekli Tepe is relatively soft compared to harder stones like granite, which means it could be shaped with persistent hammering and chiseling using stone tools. Archaeologists have found large quantities of flint flakes and stone implements in the area, suggesting that quarrying and shaping pillars was a major activity at the site. Some partially cut pillars remain in the bedrock quarries today, abandoned before they were fully removed. One of these unfinished pillars measures more than 7 meters in length, providing a clear indication of the scale the builders were capable of attempting. Once a pillar had been separated from the bedrock, the next challenge was shaping it into the distinctive T-form seen throughout the site. The horizontal top section appears to represent a stylized head, while the vertical shaft forms the body. Carvings on several pillars show arms running down the sides and hands meeting near the front of the pillar's lower section, reinforcing the idea that these stones represent human-like figures. In some cases, the carvings also include belts, loincloths, or animal reliefs. These details matter because they show that the pillars were not only structural elements, they were symbolic objects designed to convey meaning. The people shaping these stones were not simply erecting walls. They were creating figures that stood within carefully organized ritual spaces. Moving the finished pillars from the quarry to the enclosures required coordinated human effort. Estimates vary, but many of the pillars weigh between 10 and 16 tons. Without wheels or domesticated animals, the builders likely relied on teams of people using wooden sledges, ropes made from plant fibers, and carefully prepared paths across the hillside. Similar transport techniques are known from other ancient cultures that moved large stones without modern machinery. Experimental archaeology has shown that relatively large teams of workers can move heavy stone blocks across short distances using simple sled systems and rollers. At Göbekli Tepe, the quarries were located only a few hundred meters from the construction areas, which made this kind of transport more practical. This process suggests something important about the organization of labor in early Neolithic communities. Large construction projects require planning, coordination, and the ability to gather enough workers for extended periods. In societies where most people depend on daily hunting and gathering, Dedicating dozens of individuals to quarrying and transporting stone would have required some form of scheduling or seasonal cooperation. Archaeologists suspect that the construction work may have taken place during times of the year when food resources were relatively abundant, allowing groups to gather and contribute labor without threatening their survival. Seasonal gatherings may also have included communal meals or feasting, a pattern that appears in other early Neolithic sites in the region. Once the pillars arrived at the construction area, the builders had to raise them upright and secure them in place. Excavation has revealed that each pillar was set into a carefully prepared socket carved into the bedrock floor or into stone foundations. The base of the pillar was placed into this socket, and the surrounding space was packed with smaller stones to stabilize it. In many enclosures, a ring of pillars forms a circular or oval arrangement, connected by low stone walls that create an enclosed interior space. At the center of these structures stand larger pillars facing each other, often reaching heights of 5 meters or more. These central pillars appear to be the focal point of each enclosure. The presence of these paired central pillars is one of the most distinctive features of Göbekli Tepe. Their size and position suggest that they held a special role within the architectural design. Unlike the surrounding pillars embedded in the walls, the central pair stands free within the enclosure, creating an open space between them. Some researchers interpret this arrangement as a symbolic stage or focal area where rituals or gatherings may have taken place. The carvings on the pillars reinforced this possibility. Many reliefs show animals that were important in the environment of the time, including foxes, wild cattle, snakes, scorpions, and birds of prey. These images may represent elements of the natural world that held symbolic or mythological significance for the communities who built the site. Another important detail is the precision with which the enclosures were constructed. Although the builders lacked metal tools, the layout of the structure shows careful planning. The circular walls follow consistent shapes, and the pillars are positioned with deliberate spacing. This level of organization suggests that the builders had a shared architectural concept before construction began. It also implies the presence of experienced individuals who understood how to quarry stone, shape pillars, and coordinate the assembly of complex structures. In other words, Göbekli Tepe was not the result of random building over time. It was a planned project that required knowledge, cooperation, and sustained effort. At this stage in the story, the first enclosures had begun to take shape on the hilltop. Massive pillars stood upright in rings, their carved surfaces catching the sunlight of the Anatolian plateau. But construction was only the beginning. The real significance of Göbekli Tepe becomes clearer when we examine what happened inside these structures and how the site functioned as a gathering place for communities across the region. In the next part, we look more closely at the animals carved into the pillars, the artifacts found within the enclosures, and what they reveal about the symbolic world of the people who built this remarkable site. As excavations at Göbekli Tepe continued through the late 1990s and early 2000s, archaeologists began documenting one of the most distinctive features of the site: the detailed animal carvings that cover many of the limestone pillars. These carvings are not random decorations. They are deliberate relief sculptures placed in specific positions on the stone surfaces, often wrapping around the sides of the pillars or appearing prominently on their faces. The animals depicted include foxes, snakes, wild boars, cranes, vultures, gazelles, and large predatory cats. In some cases, the animals are shown alone. In others, multiple species appear together in complex arrangements. This mattered because the choice of animals provides clues about the environment, the beliefs, and possibly the social identity of the communities connected to the site. The animals carved into the pillars correspond closely with species known to inhabit southeastern Anatolia during the early Holocene period. Archaeological evidence from the region confirms that gazelles, wild cattle, boar, foxes, and various bird species were common in the surrounding plains and hills. The presence of these animals in the carvings suggests that the builders were drawing directly from the world they lived in. However, the carvings are not simple illustrations of daily life. Many of the animals appear in dynamic poses: snakes twisting along the stone, foxes striding across the pillar surface, or birds spreading their wings. Some reliefs even show multiple animals interacting in ways that may represent symbolic narratives rather than literal scenes. One of the most famous carvings at Göbekli Tepe appears on what archaeologists call Pillar 43 in Enclosure D, sometimes referred to as the vulture stone. This pillar displays a complex arrangement of birds, including what appears to be a vulture with outstretched wings, along with other animals and abstract symbols. Some researchers have suggested that the imagery might relate to ancient funerary practices in which birds of prey played a role in the exposure of the dead, a practice known from later cultures in the region. However, interpretations remain uncertain. Archaeologists must rely on comparisons with other sites and cautious analysis, because no written records exist from the period. To explain the meaning of these images, another striking feature of the carvings is the repeated appearance of dangerous animals such as snakes and scorpions. These creatures appear frequently across several enclosures and may have carried symbolic meanings related to danger, protection, or transformation. Their presence suggests that the builders were not only representing the natural environment, but also expressing ideas about forces within it. This mattered because symbolic representation of animals often plays a role in early belief systems, where particular species become associated with spiritual powers, clan identities, or mythological narratives. The distribution of animal imagery across the pillars is not uniform. Some enclosures emphasize certain species more than others, which may indicate that different groups contributed to the construction of different structures. If communities from various areas gathered at Göbekli Tepe, they may have carved animals that were particularly significant within their own cultural traditions. This possibility has led some researchers to propose that the site functioned as a regional gathering place, where multiple groups participated in shared rituals while maintaining their distinct identities. Evidence from excavations inside the enclosures supports the idea that gatherings took place at the site. Archaeologists have uncovered large quantities of animal bones, many of them from gazelles and wild cattle. The bones often show cut marks consistent with butchering, suggesting that animals were processed and consumed at the site. This pattern indicates large-scale communal meals, sometimes referred to as feasting events. Feasting plays an important role in many human societies because it reinforces social bonds and creates opportunities for cooperation between groups. At Göbekli Tepe, communal feasting may have accompanied rituals or ceremonies conducted within the stone enclosures. The presence of grinding stones and other tools also indicates that plant foods were processed at the site, although clear evidence of fully domesticated crops appears later in the archaeological record. People in the region were already collecting and processing wild grains. Grinding stones allow researchers to infer that plant foods formed part of the diet during gatherings at the site. This combination of hunted animals and processed plant resources suggests that large numbers of people may have gathered periodically, bringing food supplies and contributing labor to the ongoing construction and maintenance of the enclosures. Another detail that stands out in the archaeological record is the relative absence of everyday domestic structures at Göbekli Tepe. Unlike many Neolithic settlements, the site does not show clear evidence of houses, hearths, or long-term residential occupation in the earliest layers. This has led many archaeologists to interpret the hilltop primarily as a ceremonial center rather than a village. If this interpretation is correct, people likely traveled to the site from surrounding areas, participated in rituals or communal events, and then returned to their own settlements afterward. This pattern would explain why such a large and complex structure exists in a place that otherwise lacks signs of permanent habitation. The symbolic power of the pillars themselves becomes clearer when considering the scale and effort required to create them. Each carved relief represents hours or days of careful work with stone tools. The repetition of certain animals across multiple pillars suggests shared cultural meanings that extended beyond a single community. In this sense, Göbekli Tepe may have functioned as a central place where stories, beliefs, and traditions were expressed in stone. The pillars were not simply structural supports. They were visual statements that communicated ideas to everyone who entered the enclosures. By this stage of construction, several circular enclosures stood on the hilltop, each with its ring of pillars and its central pair of towering figures. People gathered there, bringing food, tools, and knowledge from across the surrounding region. They carved animals into the stone and participated in communal activities that likely combined ritual, storytelling, and social cooperation. But the story of Göbekli Tepe does not end with construction and gatherings. One of the most unusual aspects of the site is what happened later. Many of the enclosures were deliberately buried under massive amounts of earth and debris. Why would a community invest enormous effort into building monumental stone structures, only to fill them in and abandon them? That question leads directly to the next phase of the site's history. In the following part, we examine the evidence for intentional burial, the layers of material used to cover the enclosures, and the possible reasons behind one of the most puzzling decisions made by the builders of Göbekli Tepe. One of the most surprising discoveries at Göbekli Tepe did not come from the construction of the enclosures, but from what happened to them afterward. Archaeologists soon realized that many of the monumental stone circles had not simply collapsed over time. Instead, they had been deliberately filled with large quantities of debris, stone fragments, soil, and animal bones. The fill material packed tightly between the pillars effectively sealed the structures, preserving them for thousands of years. This mattered because it showed that the builders themselves intentionally buried the enclosures rather than abandoning them to natural decay. The fill layers contain a mixture of materials that provide valuable information about life at the site. Archaeologists have identified thousands of stone tools, fragments of limestone, animal bones, and other cultural remains within the packed debris. Many of these materials appear to come from everyday activities, such as tool production and food preparation. This suggests that the material used to fill the enclosures may have been gathered from surrounding activity areas rather than brought from distant locations. The debris was carefully deposited, gradually filling the interior spaces until the tops of the pillars were completely covered. This process required significant labor. Filling a stone enclosure several meters deep with dense material would have taken organized effort and time. The builders were not simply dumping debris randomly. The fill layers show patterns that indicate repeated episodes of deposition. In some places, archaeologists can see distinct phases where the enclosure was partially filled, followed by additional layers later. This suggests that the burial of the structures may have been a gradual process rather than a single event. Why would the builders bury their own monuments? Archaeologists have proposed several explanations, but none has been universally accepted. One possibility is that the burial marked the end of a ceremonial cycle. In some cultures, ritual structures are intentionally decommissioned or covered when their use period ends. Burying the enclosure may have symbolized the completion of a social or religious phase, allowing new structures to be built nearby without destroying the earlier ones. This interpretation fits the pattern seen at Göbekli Tepe, where newer enclosures were constructed while older ones were gradually filled in. Another explanation focuses on environmental and social change. Around the same period that the enclosures were being buried, the region was experiencing significant shifts in human settlement patterns. Evidence from nearby archaeological sites shows increasing signs of early farming and more permanent village life. As communities began to settle and cultivate crops, the role of large seasonal gathering places may have changed. If daily life became more centered on permanent settlements, the need for a large ceremonial site like Göbekli Tepe could have diminished. The burial of the enclosures also had an unexpected consequence. By covering the structures with dense material, the builders unintentionally preserved them in remarkable condition. The pillars remained upright, protected from erosion and later human activity for thousands of years. Without this deliberate burial, many of the carvings and architectural features might have been destroyed long before modern archaeologists arrived. This leads to an important transition in the story. The decision to bury the enclosures suggests that Göbekli Tepe was not a static monument, but part of a changing social landscape. In the next part, we examine how the site evolved over time, including the construction of later and smaller structures that reflect a shift in how the hilltop was used. By the time several of the major stone enclosures had been constructed and used, Göbekli Tepe had already become something more than a single building project. It had turned into a place that accumulated layers of activity over generations. Archaeological evidence shows that construction did not happen all at once. Instead, different enclosures were built, used, and eventually buried across a long period that stretched for centuries. This mattered because it demonstrates that Göbekli Tepe was not the result of a single group or moment in time. Multiple generations returned to the hill, continuing a tradition that had already begun long before them. The earliest and most impressive structures belong to what archaeologists classify as the pre-pottery Neolithic period, roughly beginning around 9600 BCE. These early enclosures, such as the well-known structures labeled Enclosures B, C, and D, contain the largest pillars and the most elaborate carvings discovered at the site. The architecture in these spaces shows a consistent pattern. Circular walls built from limestone blocks, a ring of tall T-shaped pillars embedded within those walls, and two larger pillars positioned at the center. These central pillars often reach heights of about 5 meters and may weigh several tons. Their placement and scale indicate that they were the visual and symbolic focus of each enclosure. Over time, however, the character of the architecture began to change. Later layers at Göbekli Tepe, associated with the pre-pottery Neolithic B period, show the construction of smaller and more rectangular structures. The pillars in these later buildings are generally smaller and less elaborately carved than those found in the earlier monumental enclosures. This shift in architectural style suggests that the purpose of the site may have been evolving. Instead of large circular gathering spaces dominated by towering pillars, the later structures appear more modest and practical in scale. This transformation may reflect broader changes happening across the region during the early Neolithic period. Archaeological evidence from nearby settlements shows increasing signs of plant domestication, including early forms of wheat cultivation. Communities were beginning to establish more permanent villages and invest time in tending crops. As a result, social organization and daily life were gradually shifting away from the highly mobile patterns of earlier hunter-gatherer groups. This mattered because the social structures that supported massive communal construction projects may have been changing as agriculture became more central to survival. The transition is also visible in the artifacts found in later layers of the site. While earlier deposits emphasize large ceremonial spaces and symbolic carvings, later layers contain more practical tools and everyday objects associated with settled life. Grinding stones, tools for processing plant materials, and other domestic artifacts become more common. This pattern suggests that the hilltop may have been used differently in its later phases, perhaps functioning as a smaller local center rather than a large regional gathering place. Eventually, by around 8000 BCE, the major construction and ritual activity at Göbekli Tepe appears to have come to an end. The remaining structures were buried beneath layers of debris and sediment, leaving the monumental pillars sealed beneath the hill for thousands of years. From that point forward, the site faded from active use, and later generations in the region no longer maintained the complex that had once dominated the ridge. This transition closes the first major chapter in the history of Göbekli Tepe. The great stone circles had been raised, used, and finally buried by the very people who built them. But the deeper significance of the site only became clear thousands of years later, when archaeologists began to ask a new question. If hunter-gatherer societies were capable of building something this complex, what does that mean for the traditional story of how civilization began? In the next act, we move beyond the construction of the site and examine how the discovery of Göbekli Tepe forced archaeologists to reconsider long-standing theories about the origins of organized human society. When the first major structures of Göbekli Tepe were uncovered in the mid-1990s, archaeologists quickly realized they were looking at something that did not fit comfortably within the traditional timeline of early human development. For decades, the standard explanation of how complex societies emerged had followed a relatively simple sequence. According to that model, humans first developed agriculture, which allowed communities to settle permanently in villages. Once people produced food surpluses, societies could support specialized roles such as builders, religious leaders, and craftsmen. Only after those changes, scholars believed, did monumental architecture, temples, shrines, and large ceremonial spaces begin to appear. Göbekli Tepe complicated that sequence in a very direct way. Radiocarbon dating placed the earliest construction of the site around 9600 BCE. several thousand years before the rise of large agricultural settlements in the region. At the time those pillars were being raised, the people living in southeastern Anatolia were still largely dependent on hunting wild animals and gathering plants from the surrounding landscape. Although some groups were beginning to experiment with cultivating wild cereals, the archaeological record does not show clear evidence of fully established farming villages during the earliest phase of Göbekli Tepe. This mattered because it suggested that large-scale ritual architecture might have appeared before agriculture rather than after it. Klaus Schmidt, the archaeologist who directed excavations at the site for many years, became one of the strongest advocates of this interpretation. Schmidt proposed that Göbekli Tepe represented a ceremonial center built by groups of hunter-gatherers who gathered periodically for ritual events. According to this view, the need to support large gatherings, perhaps involving feasting, social exchange, and shared ceremonies may have encouraged people to begin managing food resources more intensively. Over time, those pressures could have contributed to the domestication of plants and animals. In this interpretation, religion and ritual did not emerge from settled agricultural life. Instead, they helped create the conditions that eventually led to it. Not all archaeologists agree completely with this explanation, but the discovery forced scholars to reconsider earlier assumptions. Before Göbekli Tepe, many researchers believed that hunter-gatherer societies lacked the organizational capacity to build massive stone monuments. The pillars at the site demonstrate that this assumption was too simplistic. Even without metal tools, writing systems, or centralized states, early Neolithic communities were capable of coordinating labor, shaping stone on a monumental scale, and constructing carefully designed architectural spaces. Another important factor in this debate is the regional context. Göbekli Tepe is not completely isolated. Archaeologists have identified other early Neolithic sites across southeastern Turkey and northern Syria that show signs of similar cultural developments. Places such as Navali, Kori, Kayon, and Karahan Tepe contain evidence of early monumental architecture, communal buildings, and symbolic art. While none of these sites exactly replicates the scale of Göbekli Tepe, they demonstrate that the region as a whole was experiencing significant social and cultural experimentation during the early Holocene. This broader context matters because it suggests that Göbekli Tepe was part of a larger network of communities undergoing major changes. Groups across the region were exploring new ways of organizing their lives, experimenting with early cultivation, and developing shared symbolic traditions. The hilltop complex may have served as a focal point within that network, a place where ideas, rituals, and social relationships were reinforced. As archaeologists continued studying the site, a new set of questions began to emerge. If large ritual centers could exist before agriculture was fully established, what exactly motivated people to build them? What kind of social structure allowed hundreds of individuals to cooperate on projects that required quarrying, carving, transporting, and erecting enormous pillars? And what role did belief systems or shared myths play in bringing these communities together? These questions lead directly into the next stage of the investigation. In the following part, we examine the social organization that may have made Göbekli Tepe possible, including the role of cooperation, seasonal gatherings, and communal labor in early Neolithic societies. To understand how Göbekli Tepe could have been built by communities that were not yet fully agricultural, archaeologists began looking more closely at how hunter-gatherer societies organized labor and cooperation. Earlier theories often assumed that only large, settled populations with political hierarchies could coordinate the effort required for monumental construction. However, research in anthropology and archaeology has shown that mobile or semi-mobile groups are capable of organizing large communal projects, especially when those projects are connected to shared rituals, seasonal gatherings, or social alliances. This mattered because it provided a realistic mechanism for how hundreds of people might have worked together at a site like Göbekli Tepe, without the presence of kings, cities, or centralized governments. One possible explanation involves seasonal aggregation. In many hunter-gatherer cultures, groups that normally live in smaller bands come together at specific times of the year when resources are abundant. These gatherings often occur during seasonal migrations of animals, harvests of wild plants, or other predictable environmental events. During these periods, communities can grow much larger than usual, creating opportunities for social exchange, marriages, dispute resolution, and ritual activities. Archaeologists suspect that something similar may have happened in the region around Göbekli Tepe. The surrounding plains supported large populations of gazelle and other game animals, and the nearby hills contained stands of wild cereals that could be harvested and processed. Evidence from the site supports the idea of large gatherings. Excavations have uncovered large quantities of animal bones, many belonging to gazelle and wild cattle. The bones often show cut marks consistent with large-scale butchering, suggesting that animals were processed and consumed during communal events. In some areas, the remains appear in dense concentrations that resemble the debris left behind after feasting. Feasting is a common feature of many social systems because it strengthens alliances between groups and reinforces shared cultural practices. At Göbekli Tepe, communal meals may have played a role in sustaining the cooperation needed to build and maintain the monumental structures. Another important factor is the concept of shared symbolic systems. The repeated appearance of similar animal carvings across multiple enclosures suggests that the people involved in building the site shared a common set of ideas or stories about the world around them. These symbols may have represented mythological narratives, spiritual forces, or social identities tied to particular groups. When communities share symbolic traditions, it becomes easier for them to cooperate on projects that extend beyond the immediate needs of daily survival. In that sense, the carvings at Göbekli Tepe may represent more than artistic decoration. They may reflect a belief system that helped unify different groups around a common purpose. The scale of labor required to build the enclosures also suggests that work was organized carefully rather than performed randomly. Quarrying limestone, shaping pillars, transporting them across the hillside, and raising them into place would have required coordinated teams. Each stage of the process likely involved individuals with specialized knowledge. Some people would have been experienced stoneworkers capable of shaping pillars and carving reliefs. Others would have organized the movement of materials and the preparation of construction areas. This does not necessarily imply a rigid social hierarchy, but it does indicate the presence of leadership roles or skilled individuals whose knowledge guided the project. Another factor that may have supported cooperation is the relatively dense population of the region during the early Holocene. Climate conditions after the end of the last ice age allowed plant and animal resources to flourish in many parts of the Fertile Crescent. With abundant wild cereals and game animals available, communities could sustain larger populations than in harsher environments. This ecological richness may have created the conditions in which large gatherings and cooperative construction projects became possible. As archaeologists continued studying Göbekli Tepe and other nearby sites, it became increasingly clear that the early Neolithic period was a time of experimentation. Communities were exploring new ways of living, combining older hunter-gatherer traditions with emerging forms of plant cultivation and social organization. Monumental sites like Göbekli Tepe appear to have played a role in that process, serving as focal points where different groups could meet, exchange knowledge, and reinforce shared cultural frameworks. This leads to another key question. If Göbekli Tepe functioned as a gathering place that helped coordinate cooperation between communities, how widespread was this cultural network? In the next part, we examine the growing number of related archaeological sites in the region and what they reveal about the broader world in which Göbekli Tepe was created. As research at Göbekli Tepe progressed, archaeologists began to understand that the site did not exist in isolation. Surveys and excavations across southeastern Turkey and northern Syria revealed a growing number of early Neolithic locations showing similar cultural traits. These sites are part of what scholars identify as the pre-pottery Neolithic cultural horizon, a period when communities across the Fertile Crescent were undergoing profound social and economic transformation. This mattered because it showed that Göbekli Tepe was one expression of a broader regional development rather than a completely unique anomaly. One of the most important related sites is Navali Quarry, located along the Euphrates River. Excavations there in the 1980s uncovered rectangular buildings containing T-shaped limestone pillars similar in form to those later discovered at Göbekli Tepe. although the scale of the architecture at Navali Kori is smaller. The presence of these pillars suggests that the symbolic tradition seen at Göbekli Tepe was already developing in the region. The site also produced stone sculptures and carved reliefs that resemble the artistic style found on the Göbekli Tepe pillars. This connection indicates that communities across the region were sharing ideas, architectural techniques, and symbolic imagery. Another significant site is Kayun, located further north in southeastern Turkey. Kayun provides evidence of a long sequence of settlement development during the early Neolithic period. Early layers show simple structures and evidence of hunting and gathering, while later phases revealed increasingly complex architecture and clear signs of early plant domestication. The site also contains communal buildings that appear to have served social or ceremonial functions. These structures suggest that gathering places for collective activities were already part of the cultural landscape during this period. More recently, archaeologists have identified additional sites with striking similarities to Göbekli Tepe. One of the most notable is Karahan Tepe, located about 35 kilometers from Göbekli Tepe. Excavations at Karahan Tepe have uncovered large, T-shaped pillars and stone carvings that resemble those at the older site. However, the layout of Karahan Tepe also includes architectural features that suggest more integrated settlement activity. This matters because it may represent a later stage in the same cultural tradition, showing how ritual architecture gradually became incorporated into more permanent community structures. Together, these sites form what some researchers call the Tatipla, or Stone Hills, cultural zone within this region. Multiple hilltop sites appear to have been used for monumental construction and symbolic expression during the early Neolithic period. Although each site has its own characteristics, they share several key elements: large limestone pillars, animal carvings, and communal architectural spaces. This pattern suggests that the people living in the region were connected through networks of interaction that allowed ideas and techniques to spread between communities. The existence of this network helps explain how knowledge about quarrying stone, shaping pillars, and constructing large enclosures could circulate across the region. Skilled individuals may have traveled between settlements, sharing techniques and participating in building projects at different locations. Seasonal gatherings could also have provided opportunities for exchanging knowledge, tools, and cultural traditions. Over time, these interactions would have strengthened a shared symbolic world expressed through similar architectural forms and artistic motifs. The regional perspective also helps place Göbekli Tepe within the broader transformation taking place at the beginning of the Neolithic era. Communities were experimenting with cultivation, managing animal populations, and creating new forms of social cooperation. Monumental architecture may have served as a way to reinforce shared beliefs and coordinate large groups during this transitional period, rather than emerging after fully developed farming societies. Ritual centers like Göbekli Tepe may have been part of the process that helped early agricultural communities take shape. By the early 2000s, this expanding archaeological landscape had transformed the way scholars viewed the origins of organized human society. The evidence suggested that large-scale symbolic construction, communal rituals, and social networks were already well established before the rise of traditional village agriculture. In other words, the roots of civilization may lie not only in farming but also in the human capacity for shared belief and coordinated action. This growing understanding raises another important question. If ritual centers and communal gatherings helped shape early society, what role did belief systems and symbolic thinking play in motivating people to build places like Göbekli Tepe? In the next part, we examine how archaeologists interpret the meaning of the pillars and what they may reveal about the worldview of the people who created them. By the time archaeologists had mapped several of the major enclosures at Göbekli Tepe, one detail began to stand out more clearly than before. Many of the massive T-shaped pillars appeared to represent stylized human figures. This interpretation comes from the carved features visible on some of the best-preserved stones. Several pillars show arms running down the sides of the vertical shaft, with hands meeting at the front of the pillar near the lower section. In addition, some pillars display belts and loincloth-like shapes carved into the stone surface. These elements strongly suggest that the pillars were intended to represent human forms rather than simple architectural supports. This mattered because it changes the way researchers interpret the layout of the enclosures. If the pillars represent human-like figures, then the circular arrangements may symbolize gatherings of powerful entities standing within the space. The two large pillars positioned at the center of each enclosure could represent particularly important figures, ancestors, mythological beings, or symbolic guardians associated with the rituals performed there. Although archaeologists cannot confirm the exact meaning without written records, the anthropomorphic features make it clear that the builders were creating symbolic representations rather than purely functional structures. The absence of detailed facial features is also significant. The tops of the pillars form the horizontal part of the T-shape, but they do not include carved faces. Instead, the form remains abstract. Some researchers interpret this design as a way of representing beings that are human-like but not individual people. In many early cultures, symbolic figures representing ancestors or spiritual entities are intentionally stylized rather than realistic. This allows the figure to represent a category of beings rather than a single identifiable person. At Göbekli Tepe, the abstract heads may reflect a similar symbolic purpose. The animal carvings found on many pillars further reinforce the idea that the enclosures were designed as spaces filled with symbolic meaning. Animals such as foxes, snakes, wild boars, birds, and large predators appear repeatedly across the site. These creatures were part of the everyday environment of the people living in the region, but their placement on monumental pillars suggests they also held deeper significance. In many traditional societies, animals become associated with myths, spiritual forces, or group identities. The repeated depiction of particular species at Göbekli Tepe may reflect stories or beliefs shared by the communities who gathered there. Another detail that supports the symbolic interpretation is the positioning of the central pillars. These pillars are typically larger than the surrounding ones and stand facing each other within the enclosure. Their placement creates a visual focal point inside the circular space. Anyone entering the enclosure would immediately notice the central pair rising above the others. This arrangement suggests that ceremonies or gatherings may have been oriented toward the space between these pillars. The architecture itself directs attention toward the center, reinforcing the importance of whatever activities took place there. Some archaeologists have proposed that the enclosures functioned as ritual theaters where groups gathered to perform ceremonies connected to seasonal cycles, hunting traditions, or ancestral memory. Others suggest that the site may have served as a place where myths were retold and reinforced through symbolic imagery carved into the pillars. Although the exact purpose remains uncertain, the consistent architectural patterns indicate that the builders were following shared concepts about how the space should function. Another important point is that the builders invested enormous effort in carving and shaping these pillars, even though the details might not have been visible from a distance. Many of the carvings appear at eye level, or slightly above, suggesting that people standing inside the enclosure could observe them closely. This indicates that the symbolic elements were meant to be experienced by participants within the space rather than displayed as distant monuments. By examining the anthropomorphic pillars, the animal reliefs, and the carefully planned architecture, archaeologists can begin to reconstruct aspects of the worldview held by the builders of Göbekli Tepe. These communities were not only hunters and gatherers surviving in a changing environment, they were also thinkers and storytellers who created shared symbolic systems capable of bringing large groups together in cooperative activity. With this perspective in mind, the importance of Göbekli Tepe becomes clearer. The site demonstrates that complex symbolic thinking and organized communal projects were already present at the very beginning of the Neolithic era. In the next act, we turn our attention to another crucial dimension of the story: how the discovery of Göbekli Tepe has reshaped modern archaeological debates about the relationship between ritual, agriculture, and the rise of early civilization. One of the most significant debates triggered by the discovery of Göbekli Tepe concerns the relationship between ritual activity and the development of agriculture. For much of the 20th century, archaeologists believed that farming was the primary force that transformed human society. According to this view, once people learned to cultivate crops and domesticate animals, they were able to produce food surpluses, Those surpluses allowed populations to grow and freed some individuals from food production, making it possible for specialized roles such as builders, priests, and administrators to emerge. In that framework, religious architecture appeared as a later development within already established agricultural societies. Göbekli Tepe introduced evidence that challenged this sequence. The earliest layers of the site date to a time when the communities of southeastern Anatolia were still largely dependent on hunting wild animals and gathering plants, although people in the region were beginning to experiment with cultivating wild cereals. The archaeological record suggests that fully developed farming villages had not yet become the dominant way of life. Yet despite this, the builders of Göbekli Tepe were able to organize the labor required to quarry stone, carve monumental pillars, and construct complex ceremonial spaces. This raised a new possibility. Instead of agriculture creating the conditions for ritual architecture, it might have been the other way around. Some archaeologists have suggested that the need to support large communal gatherings could have encouraged communities to manage food resources more carefully. If hundreds of people were gathering at a site like Göbekli Tepe during seasonal events, those gatherings would require reliable food supplies. That pressure may have motivated groups to begin cultivating plants or managing wild animal populations in more systematic ways. One of the pieces of evidence supporting this idea comes from the study of plant remains in the region. Archaeobotanical research has identified wild varieties of incorn wheat growing naturally in the hills near Göbekli Tepe. Genetic studies suggest that some of the earliest domesticated forms of wheat may have originated in the same general area. This does not mean that the builders of Göbekli Tepe were already farmers, but it indicates that they lived in an environment where early cultivation experiments were possible. Communities familiar with harvesting wild grains may have gradually shifted toward planting and tending them. Another clue appears in the scale of the feasting evidence at the site. Large concentrations of animal bones, particularly from gazelle and wild cattle, suggest that significant quantities of food were consumed during gatherings. Preparing food for large numbers of people requires planning and cooperation. If these gatherings occurred regularly, communities may have begun storing food or organizing hunting and gathering efforts more strategically to ensure that sufficient resources were available. At the same time, it is important to recognize that the relationship between ritual and agriculture was probably complex rather than one-directional. The transition to farming did not happen suddenly. Instead, it developed gradually over many centuries as communities experimented with different strategies for obtaining food. Ritual centers, like Göbekli Tepe, may have been part of that broader transformation, providing social frameworks that encouraged cooperation and the sharing of knowledge about new subsistence practices. Another aspect of the debate involves social motivation. Large communal projects often require strong cultural incentives. Ritual gatherings, shared myths, and symbolic traditions can provide those incentives by giving communities reasons to cooperate beyond immediate survival needs. In this context, the construction of monumental architecture may have reinforced group identity and created social bonds that made long-term cooperation possible. These ideas remain the subject of ongoing research and debate within archaeology. Different scholars emphasize different factors, including environmental change, population growth, and cultural innovation. However, most researchers now agree that Göbekli Tepe demonstrates something fundamental about early human societies. The capacity for organized cooperation and symbolic expression existed well before the emergence of cities and states. This realization leads to another important question. If ritual centers like Göbekli Tepe played a role in shaping early agricultural societies, how did those societies eventually transition into the permanent villages and complex settlements that define later phases of the Neolithic period? In the next part, we examine the archaeological evidence for that transition and explore how life in the region began to change after the era of monumental hilltop sanctuaries. While the earliest phase of Göbekli Tepe appears to belong to communities that still relied heavily on hunting and gathering, the centuries that followed show clear signs of change across the region. Archaeological evidence from southeastern Anatolia indicates that people were gradually transitioning toward more stable patterns of settlement. This shift did not happen suddenly, and it did not occur everywhere at the same time. Instead, Communities experimented with different combinations of hunting, gathering, and early cultivation. Over many generations, these experiments slowly transformed the way people organize their lives. One of the clearest indicators of this transition is the increasing evidence for plant domestication. Archaeobotanical studies in the region have identified early domesticated forms of wheat and barley dating to the later phases of the preparatory Neolithic period. These plants differ from their wild ancestors in subtle but important ways, such as the structure of their seed heads, which become easier for humans to harvest and process. The presence of these early domesticated grains suggests that communities were beginning to cultivate crops intentionally, rather than simply collecting wild plants from the landscape. This mattered because agriculture allows populations to remain in one place for longer periods of time. At the same time, archaeological sites in the region showed the appearance of more permanent architectural structures. Places such as Cayenne and Nevali Kori contain rectangular houses built with stone foundations and mud brick walls. Unlike temporary shelters used by highly mobile hunter-gatherer groups, these houses indicate long-term occupation. Their construction required investment in materials and labor, suggesting that families or extended groups were beginning to establish stable settlements. Within these settlements, communal buildings often appear alongside domestic structures, indicating that social and ritual activities remained important parts of community life. The emergence of permanent villages also changed how people interacted with the landscape. Instead of moving frequently in search of resources, settled communities began managing nearby environments more intensively. Fields were cleared for cultivation, and animals such as goats and sheep gradually entered the early stages of domestication. These changes created new patterns of daily work and seasonal activity. Farming required careful attention to planting, harvesting, and storage, which encouraged communities to remain close to their cultivated fields throughout the year. This transition likely influenced the role of sites like Göbekli Tepe. When communities were more mobile, large regional gathering places may have served as central points for social interaction and ritual cooperation. As villages became more permanent and daily life centered on local agriculture, the need for distant ceremonial centers may have declined. Instead, ritual activities could take place within or near the settlements themselves. Smaller communal buildings found in early Neolithic villages may represent the continuation of traditions that once occurred at larger hilltop complexes. Evidence for this shift appears in the later layers of Göbekli Tepe itself. As mentioned earlier, the monumental circular enclosures were eventually replaced by smaller structures with simpler designs. The pillars used in these later buildings are typically shorter and less elaborately carved. This change suggests that the symbolic emphasis of the earlier monumental phase was gradually diminishing. The site may still have been visited and used, but it no longer required the same level of labor or regional cooperation that characterized its earliest construction. Another important development during this period was the increasing complexity of social organization within villages. As populations grew and agricultural production expanded, communities needed systems for managing resources such as stored grain and domesticated animals. Archaeologists have found evidence of specialized tools, storage facilities, and increasingly standardized architectural layouts in early Neolithic settlements. These features indicate that societies were becoming more structured, even if they had not yet developed the formal hierarchies seen in later urban civilizations. By the time the major activity at Göbekli Tepe came to an end, the broader region was entering a new phase of human history. Villages were becoming permanent fixtures of the landscape. Agriculture was spreading, and social systems were adapting to new economic realities. The monumental hilltop sanctuary that once brought distant communities together had served its role during a crucial transitional period. The next part of the story explores another dimension of this transformation: how archaeologists interpret the cultural meaning of Göbekli Tepe in light of these changes, and why the site continues to reshape modern discussions about the origins of organized religion and early human society. Even after decades of excavation and research, one central question about Göbekli Tepe remains open. What exactly was the site used for? The enormous stone pillars, the circular enclosures, and the animal carvings clearly show that the hilltop complex had symbolic importance. But archaeologists still debate the precise nature of the activities that took place there. The absence of written records means that every interpretation must rely on physical evidence architecture, tools, animal bones, and the broader cultural context of the early Neolithic period. One widely discussed interpretation is that Göbekli Tepe functioned primarily as a ceremonial center. According to this view, the large circular enclosures served as spaces for ritual gatherings involving multiple communities from the surrounding region. The scale of the architecture suggests that the builders expected groups of people to gather inside these structures. The arrangement of pillars around the perimeter and the central pair of towering stones creates a space that naturally focuses attention toward the middle of the enclosure. This design would have been well suited for ceremonies, storytelling, or symbolic performances involving the participants gathered within the circle. Another piece of evidence supporting the ceremonial interpretation is the lack of clear residential structures in the earliest layers of the site. Archaeologists have not found typical domestic features such as hearths, storage areas, or permanent housing associated with the earliest monumental enclosures. This absence suggests that the hilltop was not primarily a living space where people stayed here. Instead, it may have served as a special destination visited during certain times of the year, possibly connected to seasonal events such as hunting cycles or harvests of wild plants. However, not all researchers agree that Göbekli Tepe was exclusively a ritual site. Some archaeologists propose that the complex may have included areas of temporary habitation that have not yet been fully identified. It is possible that small groups of workers or caretakers stayed at the site during construction periods, or while maintaining the structures. If this were the case, the hilltop might have functioned both as a ceremonial center and as a place where certain specialized activities occurred. This interpretation highlights the fact that archaeological sites often served multiple purposes rather than fitting neatly into a single category. Another perspective focuses on the symbolic meaning of the pillars themselves. As discussed earlier, many of the pillars appear to represent stylized human figures. Some researchers interpret these figures as representations of ancestors or mythological beings. In many early societies, ancestral memory plays an important role in social organization. Gathering in spaces associated with ancestors could reinforce group identity and shared traditions. If the pillars symbolized powerful ancestral figures, the enclosures may have served as places where communities honored their collective past and reaffirmed social bonds. The carvings of animals may also have played a role in communicating cultural knowledge. Many traditional societies use animal imagery to express myths about the origin of the world, the behavior of natural forces, or the relationship between humans and animals. The repeated appearance of certain species, such as foxes, snakes, and birds of prey, reflect stories that were widely known among the communities connected to the site. These carvings would have served as visual reminders of those narratives, helping to transmit cultural knowledge across generations. Another factor to consider is the effort invested in constructing and later burying the enclosures. The deliberate burial of these monumental spaces suggests that the builders recognized a clear boundary between active use and closure. Covering the structures may have been part of a ritual process, marking the end of one ceremonial phase and the beginning of another. In many cultures, ritual spaces are intentionally decommissioned when their symbolic role has been fulfilled. This possibility helps explain why the builders chose to preserve the structures rather than dismantling them. Although scholars continue to debate the precise purpose of Göbekli Tepe, most agree on one point. The site demonstrates that early human communities possessed complex symbolic systems capable of organizing large groups around shared beliefs. Whether those beliefs focused on ancestors, mythological narratives, or seasonal rituals, they were powerful enough to motivate the construction of one of the earliest monumental complexes in human history. This understanding leads directly into the final part of this act, where we examine how the discoveries at Göbekli Tepe have influenced modern archaeology, and why the site continues to reshape our understanding of early civilization. By the early 2000s, Göbekli Tepe had moved from being an obscure excavation site to one of the most discussed archaeological discoveries in the world. The combination of its age, monumental architecture, and symbolic carvings forced researchers to revisit long-standing assumptions about the origins of organized society. For decades, the dominant narrative suggested that agriculture came first, followed by permanent settlements, and only then the appearance of temples or ritual centers. Göbekli Tepe introduced strong evidence that this sequence might not always apply. The builders of the site demonstrated that large-scale ritual architecture could exist at a time when many communities were still transitioning from hunting and gathering toward agriculture. This mattered because it shifted the focus of archaeological discussions toward the role of social cooperation and shared belief systems in early human development. Instead of viewing religion and ritual as byproducts of complex societies, some scholars began considering them as driving forces that helped organize early communities. If groups of people gathered regularly at sites like Göbekli Tepe for ceremonies, feasts, and symbolic activities, those gatherings would require planning, communication, and collective effort. Over time, such interactions could strengthen social networks and encourage innovations in food production, resource management, and settlement patterns. The discovery also highlighted the importance of the broader region where Göbekli Tepe is located. Southeastern Turkey sits within the northern portion of the Fertile Crescent, an area known for its early experiments with plant domestication. Archaeological research has shown that the surrounding hills contain wild ancestors of crops, such as einkorn wheat, which later became one of the earliest domesticated grains. The proximity of these wild plant resources may have allowed communities in the region to gradually shift from gathering to cultivation. Göbekli Tepe stands at the center of this landscape, suggesting that social and symbolic developments may have occurred alongside the earliest stages of agriculture. Another reason the site changed archaeology is the way it demonstrated the capabilities of early Neolithic communities. The construction of the stone enclosures required quarrying limestone blocks, shaping pillars weighing several tons, transporting them across the hilltop, and raising them into carefully prepared sockets. All of this work had to be done without metal tools, wheeled vehicles, or domesticated animals capable of pulling heavy loads. The success of such construction projects indicates that early societies possessed organizational skills and technical knowledge that had often been underestimated in earlier models of human development. Göbekli Tepe also encouraged archaeologists to search for additional sites with similar characteristics. As research expanded across southeastern Turkey, more locations with large T-shaped pillars and communal architecture began to emerge. Sites such as Karahan Tepe and other locations within the Tipler cultural zone revealed that the phenomenon of monumental stone architecture during the early Neolithic period was not limited to a single hilltop. Instead, it appeared to be part of a broader cultural pattern involving multiple communities across the region. These discoveries have helped reshape how scholars interpret the transition from mobile hunter-gatherer societies to settled agricultural community. Rather than a simple linear progression, the process now appears more complex and interactive. Ritual gatherings, symbolic traditions, environmental changes, and early agricultural experiments likely influenced each other in multiple ways. Göbekli Tepe provides a window into this transitional moment when human societies were exploring new forms of cooperation and cultural expression. Another important aspect of the site is the remarkable preservation of its structures. Because many of the enclosures were deliberately buried by the people who built them, the pillars remained protected for thousands of years. When archaeologists began excavating the site, they found many of the carvings and architectural elements still intact. This preservation allows researchers to study the details of early Neolithic art and construction techniques in ways that would not be possible at sites that were exposed to centuries of erosion or later human activity. Today, Göbekli Tepe continues to be the focus of ongoing excavation and research. Only a small portion of the site has been fully uncovered, and geophysical surveys suggest that many additional structures remain buried beneath the hill. Each new discovery adds to our understanding of how the complex developed and how it fit within the larger cultural landscape of the early Neolithic world. With these insights in mind, the story now moves toward the final phase of the narrative. In the next act, we examined how Göbekli Tepe was rediscovered in modern times, how archaeological research at the site continues today, and why its lessons about cooperation, belief, and human creativity still matter in understanding the earliest chapters of civilization. Although Göbekli Tepe is now one of the most famous archaeological sites in the world, its significance remained hidden for most of modern history. The hill itself had always been visible in the landscape of southeastern Turkey, rising gently above the surrounding plains, not far from the city of Kenlia. Local farmers knew the area well, and stone fragments sometimes appeared on the surface of the ground when fields were cleared. Some of these stones were collected or moved over the years, but their importance was not understood. For a long time, the hill was simply another feature of the rural landscape. The first modern archaeological survey that recorded the site took place in 1963, during a joint project carried out by researchers from the University of Chicago and Istanbul University. The survey team noticed several large limestone blocks and fragments partially visible at the surface. Some stones appeared to have been shaped by human activity, but the investigators did not immediately recognize the full significance of what they were seeing. Based on the limited evidence available at the time, the site was interpreted as a possible medieval cemetery, a common type of site in the region. Because no excavation followed this initial survey, the deeper layers of the mound remained untouched for decades. For more than 30 years, the hill attracted little attention from the archaeological community. The true nature of the site remained concealed beneath layers of soil and debris. This changed in the early 1990s, when a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt encountered references to the earlier survey while reviewing archaeological records related to the region. Schmidt had been working at the nearby Neolithic site of Navali Quarry, where T-shaped limestone pillars had already been discovered. When he examined photographs and descriptions of the stones reported at Göbekli Tepe, he noticed similarities that suggested the site might be much older and more significant than previously assumed. In 1994, Schmidt traveled to the hill to examine it personally. What he saw immediately caught his attention. Scattered across the surface were fragments of limestone pillars that looked strikingly similar to those found at Navali Quarry, but on a much larger scale. Some stones clearly displayed the distinctive T-shaped profile associated with early Neolithic architecture. Schmidt quickly realized that the site might contain monumental structures dating to a very early period of human history. This mattered because no other known site from that era contained such large stone pillars arranged in complex architectural forms. Excavations began in 1995 under the direction of the German Archaeological Institute. In cooperation with the Şanlıurfa Museum in Turkey, the first trenches quickly revealed the tops of enormous pillars buried beneath the soil. As the excavation expanded, archaeologists uncovered circular stone enclosures with massive T-shaped pillars arranged around their edges and towering central pillars standing inside. These structures were far older than anything expected in the region at the time. Radiocarbon dating soon confirmed that the earliest phases of construction dated to around 9600 BCE, placing the site at the very beginning of the Neolithic period. The discovery immediately attracted international attention because it contradicted the prevailing assumptions about when monumental architecture first appeared in human history. Here was a complex ceremonial structure built thousands of years before Stonehenge, the pyramids of Egypt, or the earliest cities of Mesopotamia. The realization that such architecture existed at such an early date forced archaeologists to reconsider many aspects of early human social organization. As excavations continued through the late 1990s and early 2000s, the scale of the site became clearer. What had initially appeared to be a single enclosure was soon revealed to be part of a much larger complex buried beneath the mound. Ground surveys suggested that many additional structures remained hidden underground. Each season of excavation uncovered more pillars, carvings, and architectural details that deepened the mystery of how and why the site had been built. The rediscovery of Göbekli Tepe marked the beginning of a new chapter in archaeological research. In the next part, we examine how excavation techniques, modern technology, and international collaboration have helped researchers gradually reveal the full complexity of the site. Once the first enclosures of Göbekli Tepe were identified in the mid-1990s, archaeologists faced a new challenge: how to investigate such an enormous and delicate site without damaging the structures that had survived for more than 11,000 years. Excavation in archaeology is a destructive process by nature. Once soil layers are removed, They cannot be replaced in their original form. For this reason, researchers must proceed slowly, carefully recording every detail of the ground, the artifacts, and the architecture they uncover. At Göbekli Tepe, this careful approach became especially important because the site contained multiple layers of activity built one on top of another. The early excavation teams began by opening relatively small trenches in areas where pillar tops were already visible. Each layer of soil was removed gradually using hand tools such as trowels, brushes, and small picks. As the soil was cleared away, archaeologists documented the position of every stone and artifact through detailed drawings, photographs, and written records. This meticulous process allowed researchers to reconstruct the sequence of construction and burial that had taken place at the site thousands of years earlier. By studying the relationship between layers of soil, stone walls, and pillar bases, archaeologists could determine which structures were older and which were built later. One of the key tools used in studying Göbekli Tepe has been radiocarbon dating. Organic materials such as charcoal or bone fragments found within the archaeological layers can be analyzed to estimate their age. Radiocarbon analysis measures the remaining amount of carbon-14 in once living material and compares it to known decay rates. At Göbekli Tepe samples, taken from the earliest construction layers, consistently produced dates around 9600 BCE, confirming that the monumental enclosures belong to the earliest phases of the Neolithic period. These results helped establish the site as one of the oldest known examples of large-scale stone architecture. In addition to traditional excavation methods, archaeologists have used modern technology to investigate areas of the site that remain buried. One of the most important techniques is ground-penetrating radar, a method that uses radar waves to detect structures beneath the surface without digging. By scanning the mound, researchers can identify patterns that suggest the presence of buried walls, pillars, or enclosed spaces. Surveys conducted at Göbekli Tepe indicate that only a small portion of the site has been excavated so far. Many additional enclosures may still lie hidden beneath the hill, waiting to be studied in future seasons. Three-dimensional mapping has also played a major role in documenting the site. Using laser scanning and digital modeling, archaeologists can create highly detailed maps of the pillars and surrounding structures. These digital models allow researchers to analyze the shapes and positions of the stones with great precision. They also provide a permanent record that can be shared with scholars around the world, ensuring that the information remains accessible even if parts of the site change over time. Another important aspect of the excavation process involves the conservation of the pillars and carvings. Once exposed to open air, ancient stone surfaces become vulnerable to weathering, temperature changes, and biological growth. To protect the structures, conservation teams monitor the condition of the stone and apply stabilization measures when necessary. In recent years, a large protective roof has been constructed over the main excavation area at Göbekli Tepe. This structure helps shield the pillars from rain, sunlight, and erosion, while still allowing visitors and researchers to observe the site. Excavation at Göbekli Tepe is also an international effort involving archaeologists, specialists, and institutions from multiple countries. Experts in fields such as archaeozoology, archaeobotany, geology, and digital mapping contribute their knowledge to help interpret the findings. By combining information from different scientific disciplines, researchers can build a more complete picture of how the site was constructed and used. Despite decades of work, only a small percentage of the mound has been fully excavated. Archaeologists intentionally leave large portions of the site untouched so that future generations equipped with new technologies and research methods can continue the investigation. This careful strategy ensures that Göbekli Tepe will remain an important source of knowledge for many years to come. The next part of the story focuses on the growing public attention surrounding the site and how Göbekli Tepe became recognized as one of the most significant archaeological discoveries of the modern era. As excavation at Göbekli Tepe progressed through the late 1990s and early 2000s, the site began attracting increasing attention from the international archaeological community. The combination of its age and monumental architecture made it impossible to ignore. Reports published in academic journals described massive T-shaped pillars, intricate animal carvings, and architectural layouts that predated many other famous ancient monuments by several thousand years. Scholars who specialized in the Neolithic period quickly recognized that the discovery had the potential to reshape long-standing interpretations about the earliest stages of organized human society. At first, knowledge about the site circulated mainly within academic circles. Archaeologists presented their findings at conferences, published excavation reports, and compared the structures at Göbekli Tepe with other early Neolithic sites in the region. However, as more pillars were uncovered and photographs of the carvings began appearing in publications, interest expanded beyond the academic world. Journalists, documentary filmmakers, and historians started presenting the discovery to a broader public audience. Images of the massive pillars standing in circular arrangements captured attention because they looked unexpectedly sophisticated for such an early period of human history. Public interest grew even further as researchers emphasized the age of the site. The earliest structures at Göbekli Tepe were already standing thousands of years before the construction of Stonehenge in Britain or the pyramids of Egypt. For many people, this comparison helped illustrate the extraordinary antiquity of the site. It also highlighted how little was previously known about the capabilities of early Neolithic societies. The realization that complex stone monuments existed nearly 12,000 years ago challenged common assumptions about when large-scale architectural projects first appeared. The growing importance of the site eventually led to international recognition. In 2018, Göbekli Tepe was officially added to the UNESCO World Heritage List, acknowledging its outstanding significance for understanding early human history. This designation recognized the site as a key cultural landmark, representing the beginning of monumental architecture and symbolic expression during the early Neolithic period. The UNESCO status also helped bring additional resources and protection measures to the area, ensuring that the site would be preserved for future research and education. Alongside academic study and international recognition, Göbekli Tepe also became a destination for cultural tourism. Visitors from around the world began traveling to southeastern Turkey to see the ancient pillars firsthand. To accommodate this growing interest, local authorities developed infrastructure around the site, including walkways, visitor centers, and protective structures designed to safeguard the exposed ruins. These developments allowed the public to observe the archaeological work while minimizing damage to the fragile remains. At the same time, the increasing popularity of the site brought new challenges. Archaeologists had to balance the need for continued excavation with the responsibility of preserving the structures. Opening too much of the site at once could expose the pillars to environmental damage or wear from visitors. As a result, excavation has remained carefully controlled, with large sections of the mound intentionally left unexcavated. This approach ensures that future researchers will still have untouched areas to study using improved technologies. Another development during this period was the rise of debates and alternative interpretations in popular media. Because Göbekli Tepe appeared so early in human history, some writers and commentators proposed speculative theories about its origins or purpose. Archaeologists have generally responded by emphasizing the importance of evidence-based research. While many questions about the site remain unanswered, the archaeological data provides a clear foundation for understanding how the structures were built and used within the cultural context of early Neolithic societies. As public awareness continued to grow, Göbekli Tepe gradually became recognized as one of the most important archaeological discoveries of the modern era. Yet the research was far from finished. With only a fraction of the site excavated, many structures remain buried beneath the mound, and each new season of excavation continues to reveal additional details about the people who built the complex. In the next part, we look at the future of research at Göbekli Tepe and explore how ongoing discoveries may continue to reshape our understanding of the earliest chapters of human civilization. Despite more than 2 decades of excavation, a remarkable fact about Göbekli Tepe remains true. Most of the site is still buried. Archaeologists estimate that only a small percentage of the mound has been fully uncovered. The visible enclosures that visitors see today represent just a portion of a much larger complex hidden beneath the hill. Geophysical surveys, including ground-penetrating radar and magnetic scanning, suggest that dozens of additional structures may remain underground. This matters because it means the story of Göbekli Tepe is still unfolding. and many of its most important discoveries may not yet have been revealed. The decision to excavate slowly is deliberate. Archaeologists know that excavation permanently removes layers of soil that contain valuable information about the past. Once those layers are removed, they cannot be replaced. Because of this, researchers prefer to investigate the site carefully over long periods of time rather than exposing everything at once. This strategy allows new technologies and research methods to be applied as they become available. Techniques that do not yet exist may one day help scientists understand the site in ways that are currently impossible. One area of ongoing research focuses on the quarries where the limestone pillars were originally cut from the bedrock. Several quarry areas have already been identified near the hilltop, and archaeologists continue studying tool marks left in the stone. These marks reveal how Neolithic workers used flint tools to carve channels around large blocks before separating them from the bedrock. Some partially carved pillars still remain in the quarries, abandoned before they were fully removed. These unfinished stones provide a rare opportunity to observe the construction process in progress, frozen in time for more than 11,000 years. Another important area of investigation involves the environmental history of the region. By studying pollen samples, soil layers, and plant remains preserved in the archaeological deposits, researchers can reconstruct what the surrounding landscape looked like during the early Holocene period. These studies help determine which plants grew naturally in the region and how human activity may have influenced the environment. Understanding the natural resources available to the builders of Göbekli Tepe provides insight into how large gatherings and construction projects were supported. Archaeologists are also examining the social connections between Göbekli Tepe and nearby sites within the Tapler cultural zone. Discoveries at places such as Karahan Tepe and other hilltop locations suggest that multiple communities participated in similar architectural traditions. By comparing artifacts, architectural styles, and tool types across these sites, researchers can trace patterns of interaction and cultural exchange across the region. These comparisons help reveal how knowledge and symbolic ideas moved between different groups during the early Neolithic period. Another question, researchers continue to explore concerns the intentional burial of the enclosures. Although archaeologists know that the structures were deliberately filled with debris, the precise motivations behind this process remain uncertain. Some scholars believe that burying the enclosures marked the conclusion of ceremonial cycles, while others suggest that the practice may have been connected to changes in social organization or settlement patterns. Future excavations may uncover additional evidence that helps clarify why the builders chose to preserve their monuments in this unusual way. In recent years, collaborative international projects have expanded the scope of research at the site. Archaeologists, geologists, anthropologists, and digital specialists work together to analyze the data collected from excavations. New digital mapping tools allow researchers to visualize the entire mound in 3 dimensions, making it easier to identify patterns that might not be visible during excavation alone. These technologies also help create permanent records of the structures, ensuring that detailed information about the site remains accessible, even as conditions change over time. The continuing work at Göbekli Tepe reminds researchers that the site is not simply an ancient ruin but an active field of scientific investigation. Each new discovery adds another piece to the puzzle of how early human societies organized themselves, cooperated, and expressed their beliefs through monumental architecture. The hill that once hid its secrets beneath layers of soil now stands as one of the most important windows into the earliest stages of civilization. With this modern rediscovery and ongoing research in mind, we now move into the next phase of the narrative. In the following act, we examine the broader legacy of Göbekli Tepe and what its story reveals about human creativity, cooperation, and the origins of complex society. When archaeologists first recognized the true age of Göbekli Tepe, the discovery forced scholars to rethink one of the most fundamental assumptions about early human civilization. For many years, the dominant explanation for the rise of complex societies placed agriculture at the center of the story. According to this model, farming created stable food supplies, which allowed populations to grow and settle permanently. Over time, those permanent settlements evolved into more organized communities with specialized roles, social hierarchies, and eventually monumental architecture. In that framework, Temples and ceremonial spaces appeared only after societies had already become economically stable through agriculture. Göbekli Tepe presented a different possibility. The monumental pillars of the site were built during a time when many communities in the region were still transitioning from hunting and gathering toward agriculture. This meant that large-scale architectural projects and symbolic ritual spaces existed before the widespread development of farming villages. The implication was significant. The motivation to build communal monuments may not have come from agricultural prosperity alone. Instead, shared beliefs, social cooperation, and ritual gatherings may have played a central role in shaping early human organization. This mattered because it highlighted the importance of cultural forces in human development. People do not organize themselves only around economic needs. Throughout history, shared ideas, traditions, and symbolic practices have often been powerful motivators for collective action. The builders of Göbekli Tepe demonstrated that early societies were capable of coordinating large numbers of people around shared cultural purposes, quarrying massive limestone pillars, transporting them across the hilltop, and arranging them into carefully planned enclosures required cooperation that extended far beyond individual families or small hunting groups. Another important lesson from Göbekli Tepe is the complexity of early Neolithic societies. Earlier interpretations sometimes portrayed hunter-gatherer communities as relatively simple groups, focused primarily on survival. The archaeological evidence from this site challenges that image. The carvings on the pillars show a sophisticated symbolic world, filled with animals, stylized human forms, and carefully organized architectural space. These features indicate that the builders possessed rich cultural traditions, including myths, rituals, and shared artistic conventions. The site also illustrates how major cultural transitions often occur gradually rather than suddenly. The period in which Göbekli Tepe was constructed was a time of experimentation across the Fertile Crescent. Communities were testing new ways of managing plants, developing early forms of cultivation, and exploring more permanent patterns of settlement. At the same time, they were creating monumental spaces that reinforced social cooperation and shared identity. These processes likely influenced one another. Ritual gatherings may have strengthened alliances between communities, making it easier to share knowledge about agriculture and new technologies. The broader archaeological landscape of the region supports this interpretation. As more sites have been discovered in southeastern Turkey, researchers have identified a network of early Neolithic locations that share architectural and symbolic similarities. The Tepe cultural zone includes several hilltop sites with large stone pillars and communal structures. This network suggests that the cultural traditions represented at Göbekli Tepe were part of a wider movement across the region during the early Neolithic period. Another reason the site remains so important is its ability to connect modern audiences with a very distant chapter of human history. The pillars standing at Göbekli Tepe were carved and raised by people who lived nearly 12,000 years ago. They had no written language, no metal tools, and no cities, yet they possessed the imagination and organizational ability to create monumental architecture that still commands attention today. The survival of these structures reminds us that the roots of human creativity extend far deeper into the past than many earlier theories suggested. As research continues, Göbekli Tepe will likely remain central to discussions about the origins of complex societies. Each new discovery at the site has the potential to refine our understanding of how early communities organized themselves, cooperated across large groups, and developed shared systems of belief. In the next part of this act, we examine how the lessons of Göbekli Tepe extend beyond archaeology and what they reveal about the enduring human capacity for cooperation and cultural innovation. One of the most important lessons drawn from Göbekli Tepe is the role of cooperation in early human societies. The construction of the site required sustained effort from many individuals working together, quarrying limestone blocks from the bedrock, shaping them into pillars, transporting stones weighing several tons, and erecting them into carefully designed enclosures could not have been accomplished by small family groups acting alone. These tasks required coordinated labor and shared planning over extended periods of time. This mattered because it demonstrates that large-scale cooperation existed long before the emergence of centralized states or complex political systems. Anthropologists often describe cooperation as one of the defining advantages of human societies. While many animal species rely on group behavior, humans possess an exceptional ability to organize collective action through communication, shared beliefs, and cultural traditions. At Göbekli Tepe, these elements appeared to have come together in a way that allowed communities to undertake projects far beyond the scale of everyday survival activities. The construction of monumental architecture suggests that people were willing to invest time and energy in activities that reinforced social identity and cultural meaning. Seasonal gatherings may have played a key role in enabling this cooperation. Archaeological evidence indicates that large numbers of people visited the site periodically rather than living there permanently. These gatherings likely created opportunities for different groups to meet, exchange knowledge, arrange marriages, and strengthen alliances. In many traditional societies, such gatherings serve not only practical purposes, but also symbolic ones. Shared rituals, feasts, and storytelling events help reinforce a sense of belonging within a wider community network. The evidence of large-scale feasting at Göbekli Tepe supports this interpretation. Excavations have revealed dense concentrations of animal bones, particularly from gazelle and wild cattle. Many of these bones bear marks from butchering and food preparation, indicating that animals were processed and consumed at the site. Preparing food for large gatherings requires planning and coordination, especially in societies that depend on hunting and gathering. The presence of these remains suggests that communal meals were an important part of the events held at the site. Feasting may also have served as a social mechanism for encouraging participation in the construction process. When communities gather for shared meals and ceremonies, cooperation often becomes easier to organize. Individuals contribute labor not only for practical reasons, but also as part of a shared cultural obligation. In this sense, the social environment created by rituals and gatherings could have motivated people to participate in the quarrying, carving, and transportation of stone pillars. Another important aspect of cooperation is the transmission of knowledge. The builders of Göbekli Tepe clearly possessed specialized skills in stoneworking, carving, and construction planning. These techniques had to be learned and passed from one generation to the next. Apprentices likely observed experienced stoneworkers shaping pillars and carving reliefs, gradually acquiring the skills needed to contribute to the project themselves. This process of knowledge transmission allowed technical expertise to accumulate over time. The shared symbolic language expressed in the animal carvings and pillar forms may also have helped maintain cooperation across communities. When groups share myths, stories, and visual symbols, it becomes easier for them to coordinate collective action. The repeated appearance of similar animal motifs across multiple enclosures suggests that the people involved in building the site shared cultural narratives that extended beyond individual settlements. The story of Göbekli Tepe shows that early human societies were capable of organizing large communal efforts without relying on formal governments or written laws. Instead, cooperation was sustained through shared cultural traditions, ritual practices, and social relationships. These forms of organization allowed communities to accomplish tasks that might otherwise have seemed impossible for groups living without advanced technology. Understanding this capacity for cooperation helps explain why monumental architecture appears so early in the archaeological record. The pillars of Göbekli Tepe are not only impressive physical structures, they are also evidence of a social system in which collaboration and shared purpose played a central role. In the next part of this act, we explore how the symbolic world represented in the pillars connects to broader patterns of human storytelling, myth-making, and cultural memory. Another lasting legacy of Göbekli Tepe lies in what it reveals about the symbolic thinking of early human communities. The pillars standing in the enclosures are not plain structural elements. Many are covered with carvings of animals, abstract symbols, and stylized human forms. These carvings showed that the builders were not only concerned with construction, but also with communication. The stone surfaces were used to express ideas, stories, and possibly shared beliefs that were important to the people who gathered at the site. This matters because symbolic communication is one of the key features that distinguish human societies from other forms of social organization. The animals depicted on the pillars are not random choices: foxes, snakes, birds of prey, wild boars, and other creatures appear repeatedly across multiple enclosures. These animals were part of the natural environment of southeastern Anatolia during the early Holocene period, but their repeated appearance suggests that they carried cultural meaning beyond their everyday presence in the landscape. In many traditional societies, animals become associated with myths about creation, spiritual forces, or ancestral stories. The carvings at Göbekli Tepe may represent similar narratives that were widely known among the communities who participated in building the site. Visual symbols have an important advantage in societies that do not use written language. Images carved into stone can transmit ideas across generations without relying on spoken explanation alone. A person entering one of the enclosures would see the animals and figures arranged around the pillars, each possibly connected to a story or cultural tradition. In this way, the architecture itself could function as a form of cultural memory. The carvings preserved shared knowledge and beliefs within the physical structure of the site. The arrangement of the pillars may also have contributed to this symbolic communication. The circular design of the enclosures creates a space where participants stand surrounded by towering stones. The central pillars rise above the others, drawing attention toward the middle of the enclosure. This architectural arrangement may have reinforced the storytelling or ritual activities that occurred within the space. When groups gathered inside the enclosure, the pillars would have formed a visual environment that connected participants to the symbols carved into the stone. Some researchers have suggested that the pillars themselves may represent powerful figures within the cultural traditions of the builders. As discussed earlier, certain pillars include carved arms, hands, and belts, indicating that they represent stylized human forms. If these figures symbolized ancestors, mythological beings, or protective spirits, then the enclosures could have functioned as spaces where communities maintained a connection with those symbolic figures. Gathering around such representations may have reinforced shared identity and collective memory. Another important element of symbolic systems is repetition. At Göbekli Tepe, similar animal images and pillar shapes appear across multiple structures, built over long periods of time. This repetition suggests that the symbolic framework used by the builders remained stable across generations. Maintaining consistent symbols and architectural patterns allowed communities to preserve cultural continuity, even as their daily lives were gradually changing with the spread of agriculture and settlement. Symbolic traditions also help explain why people would invest so much effort in constructing and later burying the enclosures. If the pillars and carvings represented important cultural meanings, the structures themselves may have been treated with respect similar to sacred spaces in later societies. The deliberate burial of the enclosures may have been a way of marking the completion of a ceremonial cycle while preserving the symbolic power of the site. The symbolic world represented at Göbekli Tepe reminds us that early human societies were deeply engaged in storytelling, myth-making, and the preservation of cultural knowledge. These activities helped communities make sense of their environment and maintain social cohesion across generations. In the final part of this act, we turn toward the broader implications of Göbekli Tepe for understanding human creativity and the long journey from small, Neolithic communities to the complex civilizations that would eventually emerge thousands of years later. As researchers continue to study Göbekli Tepe, one conclusion has become increasingly clear. The site represents far more than an isolated architectural achievement. It provides a rare window into a moment when human societies were beginning to experiment with new forms of cooperation, symbolism, and social organization. The people who built the enclosures on this hill lived in a world without cities, metal tools, writing systems, or formal governments. Yet they possessed the ability to imagine shared cultural projects large enough to bring many communities together in collective effort. This matters because it shows that the roots of complex society extend deep into the early Neolithic period. The monumental pillars at Göbekli Tepe demonstrate that the capacity for large-scale organization existed long before the rise of urban civilizations. The construction of each enclosure required coordinated planning, skilled craftsmanship, and sustained labor over time. Even without advanced technology, the builders successfully quarried limestone, shaped massive pillars, and arranged them into carefully designed architectural spaces. These achievements suggest that early human groups possessed a sophisticated understanding of teamwork, resource management, and symbolic expression. Another important lesson from Göbekli Tepe concerns the role of shared belief systems in shaping human behavior. Throughout history, societies have often organized large projects around cultural traditions, rituals, and symbolic ideas that give meaning to collective action. The carvings and pillar forms at Göbekli Tepe indicate that similar forces were already at work nearly 12,000 years ago. Whether the enclosures were used for ceremonies, storytelling, or seasonal gatherings, they clearly functioned as spaces where communities expressed a shared understanding of the world around them. The story of the site also illustrates how cultural innovation can emerge during periods of environmental and social change. The early Holocene was a time when communities across the Fertile Crescent were adapting to shifting climates and experimenting with new ways of obtaining food. Some groups began cultivating plants and managing animal populations, gradually moving toward agricultural life. In this transitional environment, gathering places like Göbekli Tepe may have played an important role in strengthening social networks and facilitating cooperation between different communities. These networks likely allowed knowledge to spread across the region. Techniques for working stone, symbolic traditions expressed through animal imagery, and emerging practices related to plant cultivation may have circulated through gatherings held at sites like Göbekli Tepe. Over time, these exchanges contributed to the broader cultural transformations that eventually produced permanent villages and agricultural societies. The enduring presence of the site also reminds us how fragile historical knowledge can be. After the final phases of activity ended around 8000 BCE, the enclosures were buried and gradually disappeared beneath the mound. For thousands of years, the hill stood silently in the landscape while civilizations rose and fell across the surrounding regions. Only in the late 20th century did archaeologists begin to uncover the structures again, revealing a chapter of human history that had remained hidden for millennia. Today, Göbekli Tepe continues to reshape our understanding of the distant past. The site challenges simplified narratives about how civilization began and encourages scholars to consider the complex interactions between culture, environment, and social cooperation. Rather than a single turning point, the emergence of organized societies appears to have been a long process involving experimentation, adaptation, and shared creativity. The pillars carved into the limestone ridge of southeastern Anatolia stand as physical evidence of that process. They remind us that even in the earliest stages of settled life, human communities were already capable of imagining projects that extended far beyond immediate survival. Through cooperation and shared cultural traditions, they created spaces that connected people across generations and helped shape the foundations of later civilizations. With this understanding, we now move into the final act of the narrative, where we reflect on what the story of Göbekli Tepe reveals about humanity's earliest journey toward civilization and why its lessons still matter today. By the time the monumental enclosures of Göbekli Tepe were gradually buried and the site faded from active use, human societies in the surrounding region were already changing in noticeable ways. The early Neolithic period did not end with the abandonment of ceremonial hilltops. Instead, it continued as communities across the Fertile Crescent experimented with new ways of living. The people who had once gathered seasonally around the stone pillars were increasingly settling into more permanent villages. This transition did not happen suddenly, and it did not follow a single uniform path. Instead, it unfolded over many generations as communities adjusted their practices in response to environmental conditions, social networks, and new technological knowledge. One of the most important developments during this period was the expansion of agriculture. Archaeological evidence from sites across southeastern Turkey and northern Syria shows increasing signs of domesticated crops, such as wheat and barley. These plants had gradually been selected from wild varieties over long periods of cultivation and harvesting. Domestication changed the structure of the plants themselves, making them easier for humans to gather and process. Once communities began planting and managing crops intentionally, their relationship with the landscape shifted. Fields needed to be tended through planting seasons, harvests required storage, and settlements gradually became more permanent, Permanent villages began appearing across the region during the later phases of the Neolithic period. Sites such as Catalyak in central Anatolia and Jericho in the Jordan Valley demonstrate how human communities were evolving toward larger and more stable settlements. These villages contained clusters of houses built close together, often constructed from mud brick and stone foundations. Inside these houses, archaeologists have found hearths, storage areas, and tools associated with everyday domestic life. The presence of such structures shows that families were beginning to remain in one place for extended periods rather than moving frequently across the landscape. As settlements became more stable, social organization also grew more complex. Communities needed systems for distributing food resources, managing land used for cultivation, and maintaining relationships between families living close together. In some cases, specialized buildings or communal spaces appeared within villages, continuing the tradition of gathering places that had existed earlier at sites like Göbekli Tepe. Although these structures were smaller than the monumental enclosures of the earlier period, they still played a role in reinforcing shared traditions and collective identity. Another major change during this time involved the domestication of animals. Goats and sheep were among the earliest animals to be brought under human management in the region. Evidence from archaeological sites shows gradual changes in the size and age distribution of animal bones, indicating that humans were selectively breeding and controlling herds. Domesticated animals provided reliable sources of meat, milk, and materials such as wool and hides. These resources supported growing populations and allowed communities to remain in one location for longer periods. Despite these changes, cultural continuity with earlier traditions remained visible. Many early agricultural settlements preserved symbolic practices that had developed during the hunter-gatherer phase of the Neolithic. Artistic motifs, animal imagery, and ritual practices continued to appear in architecture and artifacts. This continuity suggests that the cultural world represented at Göbekli Tepe did not disappear when farming spread. Instead, elements of that symbolic tradition were carried forward into the emerging agricultural societies. The transition from seasonal gatherings at ceremonial hilltops to permanent villages represents one of the most important transformations in human history. It marked the beginning of a long process that would eventually lead to the development of towns, cities, and complex civilizations. However, this transformation did not erase the earlier achievements of Neolithic communities. The cooperative traditions, symbolic systems, and architectural knowledge developed during the era of Göbekli Tepe likely contributed to the social foundations of later societies. In the next part, we examine how these early agricultural villages gradually evolved into more complex social systems, setting the stage for the rise of the first true civilizations thousands of years later. As agriculture became more reliable across parts of the Fertile Crescent, early villages began to grow both in size and in stability. Communities that once moved seasonally in search of food were now investing time and labor into building houses, clearing fields, and maintaining cultivated land. This shift changed daily life in fundamental ways. Instead of following migrating animals or wild plant cycles across large territories, families now spent most of the year in one place. Farming required attention to planting seasons, irrigation in some areas, harvesting, and food storage. These new responsibilities encouraged the development of settlements where people could live close to their fields and manage resources more effectively. Archaeological sites from the later Neolithic period provide clear evidence of this transformation. Villages such as Catalyak, which flourished around 7400 BC in central Anatolia, show densely packed houses, built side by side without streets between them. Residents entered their homes through openings in the roof, and movement across the settlement occurred by walking over the flat rooftops. Inside the houses, archaeologists have found hearths, ovens, storage bins, and wall paintings depicting animals and symbolic scenes. These details indicate that domestic life had become highly structured and that cultural traditions continued to play an important role in everyday environments. Another well-known settlement from the early agricultural period is Jericho, located in the Jordan Valley. Jericho is one of the oldest continuously inhabited sites known to archaeology. Evidence from the site shows early defensive walls and a large stone tower built thousands of years before the emergence of cities in Mesopotamia. Although Jericho developed under somewhat different environmental conditions than the settlements of Anatolia, it demonstrates the growing complexity of early farming communities. Larger populations required systems for managing water resources, protecting stored food, and organizing labor within the settlement. As villages expanded, social relationships within communities became more structured. Living in close proximity required systems for cooperation and conflict resolution. Families needed to share access to land, water sources, and communal spaces. Archaeological evidence suggests that early agricultural societies relied heavily on kinship networks and local traditions to maintain social order. Decisions about planting, harvesting, and resource management were likely coordinated through informal leadership rather than formal governments. The introduction of agriculture also created new economic possibilities. Crops such as wheat and barley could be stored for long periods, allowing communities to accumulate food reserves. These reserves provided security during times when harvests were poor or when environmental conditions were unpredictable. Stored food also allowed populations to grow gradually. Since communities could support more people than mobile hunter-gatherer groups, relying only on immediate resources, with larger populations and stable settlements came increased specialization of labor. Not everyone needed to participate in food production all the time. Some individuals focused on tasks such as tool making, pottery production, weaving, or construction. Over time, these specialized skills became important components of village economies. Skilled craftspeople produced tools and materials that supported both agricultural work and everyday domestic life. Despite these changes, many symbolic traditions carried forward from earlier periods. Archaeological evidence from sites like Catalyak shows elaborate wall paintings, figurines, and ritual spaces within houses. Some of these images depict animals that were also prominent in the carvings of Göbekli Tepe, suggesting a continuity of symbolic imagery across generations. This continuity reinforces the idea that early agricultural societies did not abandon their cultural traditions when they adopted farming. Instead, those traditions adapted to new forms of settlement and social organization. The growth of early villages marks another important stage in the long process that eventually led to complex civilizations. These settlements created stable social environments where knowledge, skills, and cultural practices could accumulate over time. As populations increased and communities interacted with neighboring regions, new forms of economic exchange and political organization gradually emerged. In the next part of this act, we examine how networks of trade, communication, and cultural exchange connected early settlements across wide regions, laying the groundwork for the first large-scale civilizations that would appear thousands of years later. As early agricultural villages became more stable and populations gradually increased, another important development began to take shape: the growth of networks connecting different communities across larger regions. Even in the earliest Neolithic settlements, people did not live in isolation. Archaeological evidence shows that materials, tools, and cultural ideas were moving between settlements long before the rise of formal trade systems or organized states. These exchanges helped spread technologies, agricultural knowledge, and symbolic traditions across wide areas of the Near East. One of the clearest examples of these early networks is the movement of obsidian, a volcanic glass used for making extremely sharp tools. Obsidian deposits are located in specific volcanic regions, particularly in eastern Anatolia. However, archaeologists have discovered obsidian tools at sites located hundreds of kilometers away from these sources. By analyzing the chemical composition of obsidian artifacts, researchers can trace them back to their original volcanic deposits. These studies reveal that early Neolithic communities were already participating in long-distance exchange networks that connected settlements across Anatolia and the Levant. This mattered because such networks allow knowledge and materials to circulate far beyond individual villages. Farmers experimenting with new crops could share seeds or cultivation techniques with neighboring communities. Craftspeople producing stone tools or decorative objects could exchange their products for other resources. Over time, these exchanges created cultural connections that linked distant groups into broader regional systems. Communication between communities also helped spread architectural ideas and symbolic traditions. The pillar structures discovered in several locations within the Tipler region suggest that knowledge of monument construction circulated among different groups. Even after the monumental phase of Göbekli Tepe ended, other communities continued to build communal spaces and ritual buildings within their settlements. These shared architectural patterns showed that cultural traditions were not confined to a single location but were part of a wider social landscape. The development of exchange networks also had economic consequences. As villages grew larger and more specialized, communities began producing goods that could be traded with others. Tools made from high-quality stone, crafted ornaments, and early forms of pottery gradually became part of these exchange systems. Although early Neolithic trade was not organized through markets or currencies, it played an important role in connecting communities and distributing resources that were not locally available. Another factor that encouraged interaction between settlements was migration. Human communities have always moved across landscapes in response to environmental conditions, population pressures, and opportunities for new land. As agriculture spread across parts of the Fertile Crescent in Anatolia, some groups likely relocated to new areas where farming was possible. These movements carried cultural traditions, technologies, and agricultural practices into new regions. Over time, this gradual expansion helped spread Neolithic lifestyles across large parts of the Near East and eventually into Europe. The growth of communication and exchange networks also encouraged the development of shared cultural identities across wider regions. Communities that traded with each other or participated in similar traditions began to recognize connections beyond their immediate villages. This process did not create centralized political systems, but it did establish broader cultural zones where similar practices and beliefs were recognized. These early networks laid the groundwork for later developments in human history. As populations increased and interactions between communities became more frequent, the foundations were established for more complex systems of trade, administration, and political organization. Thousands of years later, these developments would eventually contribute to the rise of the first cities in regions such as Mesopotamia. The story of Göbekli Tepe fits into this larger pattern as an early example of how shared cultural spaces could connect communities across a wide landscape. The hilltop sanctuary may have served as one of the earliest gathering points within a network that later evolved into more permanent settlements and regional societies. In the next part of this act, we conclude the journey by examining how these early developments ultimately led toward the emergence of the first civilizations and why the lessons of Göbekli Tepe remain relevant for understanding the deep history of human cooperation. The developments that followed the Neolithic period gradually led humanity toward one of the most significant transformations in its history: the emergence of the first civilizations. By the time several thousand years had passed after the construction of Göbekli Tepe, many communities across the Near East had become firmly established agricultural societies. Villages grew into larger settlements, and these settlements began to organize themselves in increasingly complex ways. Agriculture supported larger populations, and those populations required new systems for managing resources, land, and social relationships. One of the regions where this transformation became especially visible was Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. By around 3500 BC, several thousand years after the builders of Göbekli Tepe had buried their monumental enclosures, cities such as Uruk began to appear. These cities contained large populations, monumental temples, organized economic systems, and eventually writing. The emergence of writing allowed people to record transactions, laws, and historical events, marking the beginning of what historians traditionally call recorded history. Although the world of Uruk and later Mesopotamian cities was very different from the Neolithic communities that built Göbekli Tepe, there are important connections between these two eras. The foundations of urban civilization cooperation Shared cultural traditions, organized labor, and architectural knowledge did not appear suddenly. They developed gradually over thousands of years as human societies experimented with new ways of living together. The people who raised the pillars at Göbekli Tepe were part of this long process of cultural development. One of the most important contributions of the Neolithic period was the establishment of stable agricultural systems. Farming allowed communities to produce food surpluses, which supported growing populations and enabled the development of specialized roles within society. Craftspeople, builders, administrators, and religious leaders could devote their time to tasks beyond food production. Over time, these specialized roles became essential components of complex societies. Another crucial development was the expansion of communication and exchange networks between communities. As discussed earlier, materials such as obsidian traveled across long distances during the Neolithic period. These early exchange systems helped connect settlements across large regions and encouraged the spread of new technologies and cultural practices. Later civilizations would expand these networks even further, creating extensive trade routes that linked distant societies across continents. Cultural traditions also played an important role in shaping early civilizations. Shared rituals, symbolic art, and communal architecture helped communities maintain social cohesion and transmit knowledge across generations. The monumental pillars of Göbekli Tepe represent one of the earliest known examples of such cultural expression. Although the specific beliefs of the builders remain unknown, the architectural design of the site suggests that gatherings, ceremonies, and shared traditions were central elements of their society. As human societies continued to grow and develop, these cultural foundations became integrated into increasingly complex systems of governance, religion, and economic organization. Cities built temples, palaces, and administrative centers that reflected both practical needs and symbolic meanings. Writing systems recorded laws and historical events, allowing knowledge to accumulate over time. Looking back across this long timeline, Göbekli Tepe stands at the very beginning of a journey that eventually led to the rise of civilizations across the world. The builders of the site lived thousands of years before the first cities, yet their ability to organize collective effort and create monumental architecture demonstrates that the roots of civilization reached deep into the early Neolithic era. The hill in southeastern Anatolia where those pillars were raised remains one of the most powerful reminders of humanity's earliest experiments with cooperation, culture, and shared purpose. Long before cities and empires appeared, people were already gathering together to build places that expressed their understanding of the world and their place within it. Nearly 12,000 years ago, on a limestone ridge overlooking the plains of southeastern Anatolia, groups of people gathered to build something that would outlast them by millennia. They did not have writing, metal tools, cities, or domesticated animals capable of hauling heavy stone. Yet they quarried pillars from the bedrock, shaped them into towering T-forms, carved animals into their surfaces, and arranged them in carefully designed enclosures. For centuries, those structures stood as gathering places where communities met, shared food, performed rituals, and reinforced the cultural traditions that connected them. Eventually, the enclosures were deliberately buried, sealing the pillars beneath layers of stone and soil. Over time, the hill became part of the landscape again. Empires would rise and fall across the Near East. Cities would appear along rivers. Writing systems would be invented, and vast civilizations would emerge. Yet beneath the mound, the pillars of Göbekli Tepe remained hidden, preserving evidence of a moment when human society was still taking its earliest steps toward complexity. When archaeologists uncovered the site in the late 20th century, the discovery forced scholars to reconsider one of the oldest assumptions about early civilization. For many years, it was believed that monumental architecture could only appear after agriculture, cities, and organized governments were firmly established. Göbekli Tepe showed that the story was more complicated. Here was a monumental complex built during a time when many people were still hunters and gatherers, or only beginning to experiment with cultivation. The implication was clear. The ability to cooperate, imagine shared cultural projects, and organize collective labor existed long before the first cities appeared. The pillars of Göbekli Tepe therefore represent more than ancient stone structures. They are evidence of the early human capacity for shared purpose. The communities who built them were able to gather in large numbers, coordinate their efforts, and create a symbolic environment that carried meaning for generations. The carvings of animals and the stylized human forms carved into the pillars suggest a world of stories, traditions, and beliefs that bound these communities together. Archaeological research continues at the site today, and much of the hill remains unexplored. Geophysical surveys indicate that additional enclosures may still lie buried beneath the mound. Each new excavation season adds more information about how the structures were built, how the site was used, and how it fits within the wider network of early Neolithic communities across the region. As technology improves, future researchers may uncover details that further refine our understanding of this extraordinary place. What Göbekli Tepe ultimately reveals is that the path toward civilization did not begin with cities or empires. It began with people gathering together, sharing ideas, cooperating in large projects, and creating spaces that reflected their understanding of the world. Those early gatherings on the hilltop in Anatolia were part of a much longer process that eventually produced villages, towns, trade networks, and the first great civilizations of the ancient world. The pillars still standing at Göbekli Tepe remind us that human creativity and cooperation reach far deeper into the past than many earlier theories imagined. Long before the written records of history began, communities were already building monuments that expressed shared identity, cultural memory, and collective ambition. Before you leave, take a moment to like the video. Subscribe to SleepTide if you enjoy long, factual journeys through history, and leave a comment below. Where are you watching from? What time is it there right now? And do you think sites like Göbekli Tepe were at the beginning of organized religion, or simply a gathering place that helped early communities cooperate? Your answers help us understand how people today interpret one of the oldest human monuments ever discovered. And now, as the story of Göbekli Tepe fades back into the quiet hills of Anatolia, the stone pillars remain where they have stood for thousands of years, silent witnesses to the earliest chapters of the human journey toward civilization.